Good evening, listener. Wherever you are, thank you for tuning in tonight. Before we dive into the mystery of tonight's story, I'd like to ask you something. Can you tell us what time it is where you're listening? And which city are you from? Feel free to drop it in the comments. Reading your messages motivates us more than you might think. Now, let's get started. Tonight, we're going to explore the haunting disappearance of a young woman in a small town. The kind of story that will have you questioning what's real. Picture this: a quiet town, a creek running through it, and a woman who vanished without a trace on a normal evening. The locals whisper that the creek holds dark secrets that might have claimed her life. Now here's something to think about. Strange lights and mysterious noises have been reported by the townspeople near that very creek. Some say the creek doesn't just take people, but it keeps them. No one has dared to go near it since that fateful night. And those who have, well, they haven't returned. The truth? It might just be darker than anyone could ever imagine. Stay tuned as we unravel the eerie events that led to the disappearance and the chilling clues that followed. And remember, keep those comments coming. We're about to begin. The evening was unusually quiet in Hollow Creek. It was the kind of night where the wind didn't even dare to rustle the leaves, and the moon hung in the sky like a pale witness watching over the town. In the distance, the creek flowed as it always had, calm and unassuming, but with a dark history that had been buried by time. It was just after dusk when Emily Thompson, a 24-year-old local, decided to take her usual evening walk by the creek. She loved the quiet, the solitude, and the peacefulness that came with it. But that evening was different. There was something in the air, something unsettling. She had been feeling it all day, like an itch she couldn't scratch. As she walked along the creek's edge, the faint sound of rushing water was the only thing that kept her company. The trees around her stood tall, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out into the darkness, like fingers trying to grab hold of her. Emily paused, her eyes scanning the water below, the reflection of the moon dancing on the surface. She had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone in town had. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the creek's dark history, the disappearances that had plagued the area for decades. People didn't like to talk about it, but those who did spoke of strange lights in the water, eerie whispers on the wind, and the occasional figure seen standing by the creek at night. But Emily didn't believe in those stories. She was a skeptic, a practical person who needed proof before she could buy into any of the town's ghost stories. She laughed off the warnings from her friends, telling them that the creek was just a creek, a peaceful, natural part of their town. Nothing more. But tonight the air felt heavier. There was a chill that seemed to settle around her, a presence that she couldn't quite place. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she took a step forward, her eyes shifting nervously to the thick woods that surrounded the creek. Then, just as she was about to turn around and head back, she heard it. Soft at first, but unmistakable. A voice. A whisper. It came from somewhere nearby, but there was no one around. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Emily, the whisper called her name, her breath caught in her throat. No one knew she was here. She hadn't told anyone she was coming to the creek tonight. Slowly, she turned her head, scanning the dark trees, but there was nothing. Just the wind, rustling the leaves, and the gentle sound of the creek flowing beside her. "Emily," the whisper came again, this time louder, closer. Her pulse quickened, and her instinct told her to run, to get as far away from the creek as possible. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Curiosity? Fear? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't move. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, standing at the far end of the creek. It was a silhouette, shadowy and indistinct, but it was unmistakable. The figure was watching her, unmoving. Emily's legs felt like lead as she took a step backward, but her foot caught on a rock, and she stumbled. The figure remained still, its gaze never leaving her. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer, it just stood there, its presence unsettling in a way she couldn't describe. Every instinct in her screamed to run, but her feet were glued to the ground. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, vanished into the trees without a sound. For a moment, Emily just stood there, unable to process what had happened. Had it been a trick of the light? A figment of her imagination? Or something more sinister? She turned and hurried back toward the town, her heart racing. She didn't know what she had seen, but one thing was certain. She was never going back to that creek again. The next morning, Emily's family and friends woke to find her missing. There was no sign of her, no indication of where she had gone. She hadn't made it back home, and no one had seen her since the night before. The only clue was her phone, found near the edge of the creek, screen cracked, but still on. Search teams combed the area. The police scoured the town, but there was no trace of Emily. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was nothing. People began to wonder if the stories were true, if the creek really had claimed another victim. But no one had any answers. Emily had simply disappeared, just like the others before her. Weeks later, a local man named Ben, someone who had always been skeptical of the town's superstitions, decided to investigate on his own. He had heard the rumors about strange lights and voices, and he wasn't one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. But after Emily's disappearance, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story. One evening, he ventured to the creek, determined to uncover the truth. Armed with nothing but his flashlight and a sense of unease, he made his way to the same spot where Emily had vanished. As he approached the water, he noticed something strange. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. His breath fogged in the air, and he could feel his heart rate pick up. And then, just as he was about to turn back, he saw it. The faintest glimmer of light dancing on the surface of the creek. At first it was barely noticeable, but as he watched, it grew brighter, more distinct. Ben's curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped closer to the water, drawn by the light. And that's when he saw it. Something beneath the surface. A shadow moving, shifting in the water, as if something was lurking just out of sight. He froze. His mind raced. What was it? Was it just the water playing tricks on him? Or was someone down there? Suddenly the light vanished, and the air went still. The only sound was the creek, rushing by as if nothing had happened. Ben backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he had seen, but one thing was for certain. Whatever had taken Emily was still out there, and it wasn't done yet. The days that followed were filled with growing uncertainty in Hollow Creek. The town was on edge, and the disappearance of Emily Thompson had left a deep scar in the community. It wasn't just her absence that haunted them. It was the lingering sense that something dark had taken root in the town, something that had been there for far longer than anyone realized. Ben's encounter by the creek had only deepened the mystery. He couldn't explain what he had seen, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was buried in the water, waiting to be uncovered. He hadn't spoken to anyone about what he saw that night, unsure whether they would believe him or think he had simply let fear cloud his judgment. But he couldn't get it out of his mind. The glimmering light, the shifting shadow beneath the surface, it was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. He spent the following days researching, diving into old records, and speaking with the few remaining residents who had lived in Hollow Creek long enough to remember the town's darker past. Most of them were reluctant to talk, their eyes darting nervously at the mention of the creek. But a few older folks were more willing to share their stories. One night, while sipping coffee at the diner, Ben struck up a conversation with a man named Arthur, who had lived in Hollow Creek for over 70 years. Arthur's eyes were clouded with age, but there was a sharpness to them that Ben found unsettling. As Ben asked about the creek, Arthur's face tightened, and he glanced around the diner as if making sure no one else was listening. "You don't want to know about the creek," Arthur muttered, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "Some things are better left buried, boy. The creek has always taken what it wants. It's not like other places. People disappear and no one knows why. You're asking the wrong questions." But Ben was relentless. "Why is it so cursed? What happened there?" Arthur hesitated, his hand shaking slightly as he took a sip from his coffee cup. "It was during the 60s, right after the flood," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "A family lived by the creek back then, the Harringtons. Good folks just like any other. But something happened to them. One by one, they started to vanish, the father, the mother, and the kids, all gone, without a trace." Ben leaned in, his curiosity piqued. Did anyone ever find out what happened to them? Arthur's face contorted with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Nobody ever found a thing. But I've heard whispers. People say the creek, the water, it has a way of calling to people, like it needs them. The Harringtons were the first to disappear, but they weren't the last. It's always the same, you see. People are drawn to the water, and then they're gone." Ben's mind raced. The stories sounded almost like a curse, like the creek had some kind of pull over people's fates. It was as though Emily Thompson's disappearance was merely the latest chapter in a long, tragic history. The next day, Ben took a trip to the local library. He combed through old newspapers, dusty records, and town archives, searching for any mention of the creek's dark past. The more he dug, the more unsettling the evidence became. There were reports of disappearances stretching back for decades, each one following a similar pattern. People who had last been seen near the creek. People who were never found. The local authorities had long since stopped investigating the disappearances. Over the years, they had chalked them up to accidents or foul play. But the longer Ben looked, the more convinced he became that something supernatural was at work. The creek was no ordinary body of water. It was as if it had a life of its own, a life that thrived on the disappearance of those who ventured too close to its edge. But there was one detail that caught his attention. According to some of the older records, the creek had not always been there. A century ago, the area around Hollow Creek had been a dense forest, with no creek running through it. The water appeared suddenly, almost overnight, after a massive storm that swept through the town. Local legend had it that the storm was no ordinary one. It was a freak event that occurred after the town had built a dam on the nearby river. The dam was said to have disturbed something ancient, something that had been lying dormant beneath the earth for centuries. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that this was no coincidence. Something had been disturbed, something deep within the earth, and the creek was its manifestation. A dark, unstoppable force that had been unleashed, one disappearance at a time. The following night, Ben returned to the creek, determined to uncover the truth. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, he made his way down the familiar path that led to the water's edge. The air felt thick with anticipation, the darkness pressing in on him from all sides. As he stood by the creek, staring into the dark waters, he remembered Arthur's words. The creek has always taken what it wants. But what was it really after? Why had it claimed Emily? And why had it claimed so many others before her? Ben turned on his flashlight and began to scan the area, his eyes darting nervously across the trees and the water. He was no longer sure what he was looking for, but the deeper he ventured, the more he felt the weight of something watching him. He could hear the water rushing, louder now, almost as if it were calling him. His pulse quickened, and a cold sweat ran down his back. Then, in the distance, he saw it again. The faint glow. A light flickering on the surface of the creek, just like the night he'd first encountered it. This time, Ben didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, determined to get closer. The light was beckoning him, drawing him toward it. As he reached the water's edge, the glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. Ben knelt down by the creek, his heart racing in his chest. The water rippled, and for a brief moment, Ben thought he saw something moving beneath the surface. Something large, something that didn't belong. He leaned in closer, his breath catching in his throat. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave way. He slipped, his foot landing in the water, and he felt the icy, cold grip of the creek pulling at him. His body froze, the sensation overwhelming him as the water tugged at his legs. But then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. Ben was left standing there, soaked and breathless, staring at the water as it calmed once again. The light was gone. He stumbled backward, his mind spinning. Was it the creek itself that had reached out to him? Or was there something else in those depths, something that fed on the fear of anyone who dared to come too close? He didn't know what to believe anymore. The answers were slipping further and further away, just out of reach, like the glimmering light beneath the water. But one thing was clear. Ben had stirred something. And now, Hollow Creek had its sights set on him. Ben spent the next few days in a haze, replaying the events by the creek over and over in his mind. His encounter with the strange light and the eerie sensation of the water pulling at him felt like something out of a nightmare. He couldn't explain what had happened, but the fear that had gripped him on that night was still fresh in his chest, tightening with every passing hour. He had returned to his small, modest house on the edge of town, but the sense of unease hadn't left him. It lingered, suffocating the air around him. Despite his better judgment, he couldn't ignore the growing need to uncover the truth. The mystery of the creek, the strange occurrences, the disappearances, everything pointed to something that couldn't be explained away. And now he had been marked. The creek, it seemed, had set its sights on him, just as it had on those before him. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, Ben received a call from Rachel, Emily's best friend. She was beside herself, frantic, asking if Ben had found anything more about Emily's disappearance. Rachel had been the closest to Emily, and the grief in her voice was evident. She had been trying to hold on to hope, but with every day that passed, the reality of the situation became more unbearable. Ben, you have to help me. I know you're looking into it. Please, you have to find her. Rachel's voice trembled on the other end of the line. Ben hesitated. He had intended to keep his investigation quiet, but the urgency in Rachel's voice stirred something in him. She was looking to him for answers, for some kind of hope that would bring Emily back. The weight of her plea hit him harder than he expected. I'm going to find something, Rachel, Ben said, trying to reassure her, though his own doubts lingered. But you have to trust me. I need you to stay away from the creek. It's not safe. There was a long pause on the line. Rachel's soft sobs filled the silence before she spoke again, quieter this time. I don't care if it's safe. I just need her back, Ben, please. Ben rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure mounting. He knew the truth was out there, but the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. Hollow Creek wasn't just a small town. It was a place cursed, a place where the past had buried its secrets in the water. And now, those secrets were beginning to surface. That night, Ben went back to the creek, this time more prepared. He carried with him a camera, a tape recorder, and a notebook. His plan was simple. Document everything. Every sound, every flicker of light, every movement in the water. He needed proof, something he could show to Rachel, to the town, to anyone who might listen. The night was colder than usual, and the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. As Ben approached the creek, he could feel the weight of the atmosphere settling around him. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches creaking and groaning as though they were alive, watching him. He turned on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the thick blackness, but it barely made a dent in the oppressive dark. When he reached the edge of the creek, he felt the familiar chill creep into his bones. The water rushed past, its sound almost deafening now, like a constant roar in his ears. He stood still, listening, waiting, trying to calm the rapid beating of his heart. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, a soft whisper, just like before. It was faint at first, like a breath on the wind, but it grew louder, more distinct. Ben's grip on the flashlight tightened, and he took a step forward. Ben, the voice was unmistakable. It was calling his name. His pulse surged, and every instinct screamed for him to turn around and leave, but his feet were rooted to the spot. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound, but there was nothing, no one. The only thing that remained was the water, rushing endlessly in the cold, unyielding darkness, and then the light. It was faint at first, like the glow of a distant lantern, but as it flickered, it grew brighter. Ben's eyes widened. The light was coming from beneath the surface of the creek. It wasn't a reflection. It was something deeper, something in the water itself. He moved closer, his breath coming faster now, the chill in the air wrapping around him like a vice. The light was so bright now, it almost hurt to look at it. Ben dropped to his knees at the water's edge, his eyes fixed on the light as it pulsed, almost rhythmically. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the blood rushing in his ears. Then, as if something had triggered it, the light vanished. The water, once calm and flowing, began to stir violently, its surface churning, as if something beneath was struggling to break free. Ben fell back, his flashlight tumbling from his hand and landing in the mud beside him. He scrambled to his feet, his heart racing as the air around him thickened. From the depths of the creek, a figure emerged. It was a shadow, dark and indistinct, like a silhouette of something or someone rising from the water. Ben stumbled back in horror. The figure seemed to rise higher, moving toward him, its form still unclear, but unmistakably there. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. There was something wrong with the way it moved, like it was gliding through the air rather than walking. The figure stopped just short of the water's edge, and Ben froze, unable to tear his eyes away. It had no face. The figure's outline was jagged, as if it were made of the very shadows around him, and the eyes, the empty, hollow eyes, that's what caught him. They were deep, black voids, staring straight at him, as if they could see right into his soul. Ben's breath hitched in his throat, and he struggled to stand, his legs shaking. He had to get away. He turned to run, but as his foot hit the ground, something yanked him back. The water, the creek, it was pulling him. He felt the icy grip of the water wrap around his legs, dragging him back toward the edge. "No!" Ben screamed, fighting against the pull, his fingers digging into the muddy soil. But it was too strong. The water rose higher, pulling him deeper, and the figure stepped forward, its hollow eyes never leaving him. Ben's vision blurred as he was dragged closer and closer to the water. The world around him seemed to warp and twist, and for a moment, he thought he saw Emily's face. Her pale, ghostly figure appeared in the water, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth moving, though no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the water released him. He fell backward onto the bank, gasping for air, his body soaked and trembling. The figure was gone. The light had disappeared. Everything was still once more. Ben lay there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Had it been a hallucination? A trick of his mind? Or had the creek truly revealed its horrors to him? He couldn't stay there. He couldn't face whatever had just happened again. With shaky hands, he picked up his flashlight and his camera, gathering what little strength he had left. He needed to get out of there. As he stumbled back to his truck, his mind racing with questions, one thought kept circling through his head. He had just witnessed the creek claim another soul. And Emily was still out there. Ben could feel the weight of the night pressing on him as he drove away from the creek, his hands still trembling on the steering wheel. His heart was still racing, and the eerie images of the figure that had risen from the water played on a constant loop in his mind. What had he seen? What was it that had dragged him toward the creek? What did it want? The truck bounced over the uneven road, its tires crunching on the gravel, as Ben fought to maintain control of his racing thoughts. The cold sweat on his brow clung to his skin, and he could still feel the remnants of the water pulling at him, as if it hadn't let go entirely. His mind wandered back to the figure. It had no face, no real form. It was as though it had been born from the very shadows surrounding him, yet its presence was unmistakable, terrifying. He had been so close, so close to being swallowed by it. When he reached his house on the outskirts of town, the sense of dread that had begun at the creek intensified. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if something was watching him. He parked his truck and sat there for a moment, gathering his thoughts before stepping out. The stillness of the night was oppressive, and the silence felt unnatural. The town, usually quiet at this hour, felt like a place that was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He entered his house, locking the door behind him, and immediately went to the small office in the corner. He needed to document everything, every detail of the night, every sensation, every fragment of information he had gathered. It was the only way to make sense of it all. He grabbed his notebook and began to write, trying to force his thoughts into coherent sentences. But no matter how hard he tried, the words didn't come. His hand trembled as he stared at the blank page, the events of the night swirling in his mind like a storm. He couldn't make sense of it. What was the connection between the creek, the figure, and the disappearances? Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Ben froze. The knock echoed in the otherwise silent house, and his heart leaped into his throat. No one came to visit him at this hour. He hesitated for a moment, listening for any other sounds, but there was nothing, just the silence of the night. He slowly walked to the door, peeking through the peephole. To his surprise, it was Rachel. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, as if she had been running. Ben opened the door without saying a word, his mind still reeling from what had just happened at the creek. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said breathlessly. "It's about Emily." Ben's stomach tightened at the mention of Emily's name. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Rachel stepped inside quickly, her footsteps almost frantic. "I don't know what's happening, Ben. I've been having these dreams or maybe they're visions, I don't know, but they're of Emily. She's trying to tell me something." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the grief in her eyes raw and visible. "She's in the creek, Ben. She's still there." Ben felt a chill run down his spine. He motioned for her to sit down, and she did so hesitantly. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and her eyes darted around, as if she were expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "Rachel," Ben started slowly, "I've been investigating the creek. Something is wrong with it. Something dark. I saw something there. A figure. No, not a person. I don't know what it was. But it was like a shadow made from the darkness itself." Rachel's eyes widened, her expression one of disbelief. "I've seen it too," she whispered. "In my dreams or visions, I don't know. Emily, she's trapped in the creek. She's not gone. She's still there, calling for help." Ben swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This was no ordinary disappearance. Whatever was at the creek wasn't just taking people, it was keeping them, imprisoning them in some twisted, unnatural way. "I need to go back," Rachel said suddenly, her voice full of determination. "I need to find her. I need to help her." Ben shook his head. "It's too dangerous. We don't even know what we're dealing with. I barely made it out alive, Rachel. Whatever's in that creek, it's not something we can fight." But Rachel's eyes were already distant, her mind fixed on the thought of Emily. She stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "I'm going, Ben. I'm going to the creek, whether you come with me or not." Ben knew he couldn't stop her. The look in Rachel's eyes told him she was beyond reasoning. If Emily was still out there, trapped in the creek, Rachel wasn't going to rest until she found her. "Fine," Ben said reluctantly. "I'll come with you, but we need to be careful. I don't know what's waiting for us there." Rachel nodded, her jaw set with a determination that made Ben both anxious and proud. They gathered their things and headed back to the creek, the same path that had already claimed Emily, and nearly claimed Ben as well. The night felt even darker as they drove toward the creek. The air was thick, pressing against the windows like a living, breathing thing. Ben felt it in his bones. The same sense of impending doom that had plagued him ever since the first time he set foot by the water. And now, he had brought Rachel with him. When they arrived, the creek was eerily silent, the water flowing without a sound. The trees around them loomed like sentinels in the darkness, casting long shadows across the ground. Ben could feel the tension building in the air, an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Rachel stepped out of the truck first, her footsteps steady but cautious. She moved toward the water, her gaze fixed on the dark, swirling current. Ben followed, his mind racing with questions and doubts. He tried to shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than they realized. As they stood by the water's edge, the air grew colder. The temperature seemed to drop by several degrees and the wind picked up, whispering through the trees. Rachel's breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and Ben could see the fear in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Ben," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Ben reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We'll figure this out, Rachel. We'll get her back." But deep down, Ben knew that this wasn't just about getting Emily back. The creek had a hold on this town, on its people, and it wasn't going to let them go that easily. Suddenly, the water began to stir. The current picked up, swirling around their feet, and the sound of rushing water grew louder, almost deafening. The moonlight reflected off the surface of the creek, casting an eerie glow across the scene. Ben turned to look at Rachel, but she was staring at something in the water. Her eyes were wide, her body rigid with fear. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Ben followed her gaze, and his heart sank. In the middle of the creek, the faint outline of a figure emerged, rising from the water. It was her, Emily. Ben's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the figure emerging from the creek. The silhouette was unmistakable. Emily. But something was wrong. She wasn't walking toward them, she was drifting, her body swaying unnaturally in the current, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes, wide and hollow, reflected nothing but the same deep darkness that the creek had given birth to. She was no longer the Emily they had known. "Emily!" Rachel screamed, her voice choked with emotion, as she took a step forward, her body trembling. "Emily, it's me, it's Rachel. We've come to bring you back." But Emily didn't respond. She didn't move. Her body hung there, suspended in the water, her hair floating around her like dark tendrils, and her eyes fixed on them with an unblinking, almost vacant stare. Ben felt a cold knot form in his stomach as he watched Emily's still form. It wasn't her anymore, not truly. The figure before them was a shadow, a reflection of what had been, twisted and corrupted by the very thing that had taken hold of the creek. Rachel stepped closer, her feet slipping slightly in the mud, as she reached out toward Emily. Come back to us, please. We can help you. You're not gone, Emily. You're still here." As her hand neared the water, a sudden and violent force shot up from the creek. The waters roiled, and with a loud, almost deafening noise, the figure of Emily began to sink, drawn back into the murky depths as though the creek had swallowed her whole. Rachel cried out, stumbling back, her arms flailing as she tried to regain her balance. Ben instinctively grabbed her, pulling her away from the water. But it was too late. The water had calmed once again, as though nothing had happened. The figure of Emily was gone, swallowed by the darkness, and in its place was nothing but the quiet, cold creek that seemed to mock their presence. "Rachel, it's too dangerous," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible over the rushing water. "We need to leave. We can't save her, not like this." But Rachel, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief, stood frozen, staring into the water. "No," she said, her voice a quiet whisper. "She's still here. I know she is." Ben's heart ached for her. He could see the deep pain in her eyes, the grief of losing her best friend. But what had happened tonight, what they had witnessed, was beyond them. The creek wasn't just holding Emily captive, it was holding something else. A darkness that had claimed not only the creek, but the souls of those who came too close. "We can't fight it, Rachel," Ben said gently. "We need to let it go." The air around them felt suffocating, and the heavy silence of the creek seemed to press down on them both. The full weight of the tragedy settled in. The disappearance, the figure in the water, and the evil force that lay beneath the surface. No one had ever truly escaped the creek. It had taken Emily, just like it had taken those before her, and it would take more in the future. Rachel nodded slowly, her face pale and resigned. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. She just turned and walked back to the truck, her footsteps heavy and slow. Ben followed her, his own heart heavy with guilt, regret, and sorrow. They had come for Emily, but in the end, they had found nothing but the void. As they drove away from the creek, the town of Hollow Creek behind them, a sense of finality settled over them. Emily was gone. The creek had taken her, just as it had taken so many others, and it would continue to claim more souls, its thirst unquenchable. Ben glanced at Rachel, who sat beside him, her face drawn with grief. She was quiet, too quiet, her gaze lost somewhere outside the truck window. He wanted to say something comforting, but there were no words. What could he say? They had done everything they could, and still, they had failed. The headlights of the truck cut through the darkness, but Ben could not shake the feeling that the creek was still watching them. The figure, the eyes, the whisper, it was all still there, lingering in the back of his mind. And as he glanced at the rearview mirror, he swore for a brief moment that he saw something standing by the creek, just beyond the trees. But when he blinked, it was gone. The case of Hollow Creek was closed. But the town's curse remained, its grip unbroken. And with that, we come to the end of The Vanishing at Hollow Creek. The creek still holds its secrets, and though we may never know the full truth, its dark influence continues to haunt those who dare to seek answers. Now, it's time to move on to the next story. Stay with us as we dive into a new mystery, a new world of chilling suspense. The journey is just beginning, and we'll be back with another story you won't soon forget. Story 2. It was an ordinary day when the Williams family moved into their new home on Maple Street, nestled on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The street was lined with large, stately trees, casting long shadows across the well-manicured lawns. The houses were charming, some old and some recently renovated, but all exuding the same sense of peacefulness and comfort. It was everything the Williams family had been hoping for, a fresh start in a calm, welcoming community. As they unloaded boxes and settled into their new home, Jennifer Williams, a stay-at-home mom, couldn't help but admire the scenery. It was a perfect place for her two children, 10-year-old Lily and 8-year-old Max, to grow up. They had lived in the city for years, always surrounded by noise and bustle. Now, they had a spacious yard, fresh air, and a neighborhood that seemed to be the ideal setting for family life. The house itself was an old, colonial-style structure with creaky wooden floors, and a fireplace that had probably seen countless families pass through its hearth. Jennifer loved the charm of the place, even if it did feel a little worn around the edges. But she wasn't concerned. She knew it would feel like home soon enough. It was late in the afternoon when Jennifer noticed their new neighbor across the street. The house was tucked away in the far corner of the cul-de-sac, with its porch covered in ivy and its windows draped in dark curtains. The house looked eerily quiet, like no one had lived there for a long time. Still, there was a faint light glowing through the curtains on the second floor, indicating someone must be home. Her curiosity piqued. Jennifer waved at the house across the street, hoping to introduce herself, but the figure standing in the window didn't respond. The person seemed to be staring at her, unmoving. She smiled awkwardly and turned back to her task, but a feeling of unease settled in her chest. That evening, after dinner, Jennifer stood at the kitchen window and gazed out at the street. The night had fallen, and the lights from the neighboring homes illuminated the street, casting long shadows. The neighbor's house remained dark, except for the dim light in the upstairs window, which she now noticed seemed to flicker, almost as if the light were struggling to stay on. Jennifer shook her head. Maybe it was just an old house with faulty wiring. She wouldn't worry about it. But then she saw something that made her pause. In the upstairs window of the neighboring house, a figure stood, silhouetted against the light. It was a man, she assumed, though it was hard to tell. He didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. He just stood there, staring out into the street. Jennifer felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching her. But before she could think much more about it, the figure vanished. The room, now bathed in darkness, left her with an unsettled feeling that lingered in her chest. She quickly dismissed it, telling herself it was just her imagination. But that night, as Jennifer lay in bed, the quiet house around her began to settle into a strange stillness. The wind outside howled, the branches of trees tapping against the windows, but it was more than just the noise. There was something else, something in the air, an unsettling tension that made her uneasy. She glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. Suddenly, she heard it. A faint noise coming from the direction of the neighbor's house. It was hard to place at first, but then she realized what it was. A voice. Someone was speaking, or perhaps whispering, in a low, steady tone. Jennifer strained her ears, trying to make out the words. But it wasn't just one voice. It was as if multiple voices were speaking at once, softly, indistinctly, in a rhythm that felt unnatural. She sat up, her pulse quickening. Was someone in trouble? Should she call the police? But then she remembered. There had been no signs of distress, no screams or shouts. And yet, the voices persisted, growing ever so slightly louder. It wasn't until the next morning that Jennifer found herself standing at the edge of the Williams family's yard, staring across at the neighbor's house. The morning sun had risen and bathed the street in a warm, golden light. The houses looked even more picturesque in the daylight, as though the dark events of the night before hadn't even occurred. She was about to turn back into the house when she noticed the figure again. It was the same man from last night standing in the same window. This time, his face was partially visible. A gaunt, pale face, framed by unkempt hair. He didn't move as Jennifer looked at him, and once again, he didn't acknowledge her presence. He just stood there, staring. The chill that had settled in her stomach the night before returned, only stronger this time. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that the man was just a neighbor, just another person in this quiet street. But the sensation wouldn't leave her. A few days passed, and still, the man remained in his house, an eerie presence across the street. Jennifer didn't know how to explain it, but something about him unsettled her. His movements, or lack thereof, bothered her. It was as though he was watching, always watching. She began to feel like she wasn't alone in her own house, even when no one was there. But it wasn't just her. Max and Lily, too, had started to notice strange things. Max, who had always been the brave one, told Jennifer he had seen the man in the window, just standing there, staring. Lily, too, spoke of it. "Mom, there's a man in the window," she said one night at dinner. "He's always looking at our house." Jennifer had dismissed it as children's imagination at first, but as the days went on, she began to see what they meant. The man was always there, in that same upstairs window, his face never moving, never changing. One evening, Jennifer decided to confront the situation. She had to know what was going on. She could feel it. Whatever was happening wasn't normal. She couldn't ignore the strange behavior anymore. She took a deep breath, walked across the street, and rang the doorbell. There was a long pause before the door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked just as strange as her husband. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. She gave Jennifer a tight-lipped smile. "Hello," Jennifer said, her voice shaky. "I'm Jennifer Williams, your new neighbor. I wanted to introduce myself and—" "Oh, we know who you are," the woman interrupted. Her voice was smooth, but it carried an odd undertone, as if she wasn't really present. "We've been watching you." Jennifer blinked, taken aback by the bluntness of the statement. I just wanted to say hello. We've been seeing the man in the window. Is everything okay?" The woman smiled again, but it was cold. "Yes, everything is fine. My husband, Thomas, enjoys watching the neighborhood. He has his reasons." Her gaze shifted as if searching for something, and Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that she was being examined, her every movement scrutinized. The conversation ended quickly after that. The woman made some vague excuse about not wanting to be disturbed and closed the door softly. Jennifer stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling like she had just stepped into something much darker than she had realized. That night, as Jennifer lay in bed, the whispering voices returned. But this time, they weren't as faint. They were louder, clearer, as if the man across the street was speaking directly to her. She could make out the words now. Names, unfamiliar, ghostly names, that sent shivers through her. Then she heard his voice. "Jennifer," it whispered. "Jennifer." The hairs on her arms stood on end, and she quickly covered her head with her blanket, hoping to drown out the sound, but it was no use. The voices continued. In the weeks that followed, Jennifer's fears only deepened. The man, Thomas, hadn't moved from his position in the window. His eyes never blinked, and his gaze never wavered from her house. And then, one night, something changed. The following days felt like an unending cycle of unease. Jennifer had tried to go on with her daily routine, taking care of Lily and Max, unpacking the last few boxes, and doing everything she could to make the house feel like a home. But no matter how hard she tried to push it all aside, the presence of the neighbor, Thomas, loomed over her every moment. The strange incidents were beginning to pile up. The whispers at night, the flickering lights in the upstairs window, and the cold, unshakable feeling of being watched. It wasn't just Jennifer who noticed it. Max had begun sleeping with his door locked, claiming he could hear footsteps in the hallway at night, and Lily had stopped playing outside in the front yard, her fear of the neighbor palpable. Jennifer had tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, that her mind was running wild after too many late nights and too much worry. But when she'd asked the kids about their experiences, she realized that they, too, had begun noticing the same strange occurrences. They had seen Thomas standing in the window, staring out, his eyes wide and unblinking. At night, they heard faint murmurs, voices, low and unintelligible, drifting through the walls. It was as though the house itself was alive, and something within it was trying to reach out. One evening after dinner, Jennifer decided that enough was enough. She could no longer ignore the oppressive feeling that had taken over their home. She had to know what was going on with Thomas and his wife. She couldn't live in fear anymore. The kids needed to feel safe, and she had to get to the bottom of this. She made up her mind to visit the neighbor's house again, to confront them directly. She had to know what they were hiding, what kind of strange power or secret they held over this house. As she walked across the street, her heart pounded in her chest. The evening had fallen early, and the street lamps cast an eerie glow on the sidewalk. The air was thick with tension, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. She reached the front door of Thomas and his wife's house and knocked 3 times. No answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time, still nothing. Just as she was about to turn and walk away, she heard a soft creak from inside the house. The door slowly opened, revealing the same woman she had met before, the one with the unsettling wide eyes. Her face was slightly more obscured now, as if she were hiding something beneath the shadows of the doorframe. "Jennifer, isn't it?" the woman asked, her voice smooth and too calm, as though she had been expecting her. Jennifer nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I just wanted to talk. I've noticed some strange things happening. My family has been feeling uneasy. We've been hearing voices at night, seeing strange things in the window, and She paused, glancing at the man behind the woman. Thomas was standing in the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on her, expressionless. He didn't say a word. Is everything all right? Jennifer asked, her throat tightening. The woman smiled thinly, but there was no warmth behind it. Everything is fine, Jennifer. We just keep to ourselves, you know. Some things are best left unspoken. Jennifer's unease grew. There was something off about the way the woman spoke, something that didn't sit right in Jennifer's stomach. But why do you always stand in the window? Why do you watch us? And the voices, what are those? Thomas stepped forward, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. We don't mean any harm. We simply observe. You might not understand now, but in time, you will. Jennifer's mind raced. The answer was cryptic, unsettling. What was he talking about? She couldn't make sense of it. And the way he spoke, like there was something more to it all, something hidden beneath his words, frightened her even more. I don't understand, Jennifer said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Why are you doing this? Why are you here? The woman sighed, her eyes softening slightly. You don't need to understand, Jennifer. Some things in life, they happen for reasons you cannot control. But if you insist on knowing more, I can show you. But you must be prepared. You may not like what you find. Jennifer felt her heart race. She wanted to run, to turn around and leave, but something inside her told her to stay. She had to know. For herself, for her family, for the children. The fear had grown too large, and she needed answers. Show me, Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible. Without another word, the woman stepped back, opening the door wider. She gestured for Jennifer to enter. Thomas stood behind her, silent as ever, his expression unchanging. Jennifer hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, her feet feeling heavy against the wooden floor. The inside of the house was dark, the air thick, with an unnatural coldness. There was no warmth here, no sense of life. Everything felt wrong. The woman led her down a narrow hallway, the walls adorned with strange, ancient-looking paintings. The air seemed to hum with an energy that Jennifer couldn't place. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, they reached a small room at the back of the house, tucked away from the rest of the home. The woman opened the door, revealing a dimly lit space. Inside, the walls were covered in symbols and markings that Jennifer couldn't decipher. There were candles scattered around the room, their flames flickering in the dark. In the center of the room was a large mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. The woman stepped inside and motioned for Jennifer to follow. This is where it all began. This is where the power resides. Jennifer looked around the room, her breath quickening. She didn't know what to say, what to do. The entire space felt alive, as if it were waiting for something. This house, the woman said softly, was built on a land that was never meant to be disturbed. The mirror, the symbols, the rituals, these are all part of an ancient practice, one that binds us to the energy of this place. We have been watching for a long time, waiting for the right time to act. Jennifer's pulse raced. What do you mean? What is all this? What have you been doing? The woman's eyes darkened. We have been waiting for someone like you, Jennifer. Someone who would not be afraid to ask the right questions. Someone who could see what others could not. You and your family. You're part of something much bigger now. The power of this house is tied to you, and soon it will claim you, just as it claimed others before you. Jennifer stumbled back, her mind reeling. She didn't understand. This couldn't be real. There had to be some explanation. This was just madness, wasn't it? But as she looked into the mirror, something strange began to happen. Her reflection didn't look quite right. The shadows behind her seemed to shift unnaturally, as if something was moving within them. The room grew colder, and the air felt thick with a malevolent energy. For the first time, Jennifer felt truly afraid. "Leave now while you still can." The woman's voice broke through the growing tension. "There is no escaping it once you're bound to this place. The house has already marked you." Jennifer turned and bolted for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to get out, had to escape the nightmare that was consuming her family. As she rushed back down the hall, she could feel the eyes of Thomas and his wife on her. But there was no time to look back. She ran out of the house and into the cold night air, gasping for breath. Her heart pounded in her chest and her mind raced with the realization of what she had just learned. The house, the mirrors, the rituals, it was all real. And now, she and her family were trapped. Jennifer stumbled down the steps of Thomas and his wife's house, her heart still racing in her chest. The cold air outside felt like a slap to her flushed skin as she hurried across the street, not daring to look back. But her mind was reeling with the implications of what she had just learned. She didn't know what to think, who to trust, or what to do next. Her house, the one she thought would be a safe haven for her family, was now the epicenter of something far darker than she could have imagined. The images in the mirror, the symbols, the words the woman had spoken, all swirled in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. When Jennifer finally made it back to her house, she slammed the door behind her, breathing heavily, and locked it with a shaky hand. She leaned against the door, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of everything. What had the woman meant? What did she mean by, "The house has marked you"? "Mom?" Max's voice cut through the silence, and Jennifer spun around. Max and Lily were standing at the top of the stairs, their faces filled with concern. Jennifer hesitated before speaking, unsure how to explain the horrors she had just encountered. I'm okay, but we need to talk." Lily, the younger of the two, ran down the stairs and hugged her tightly. "Mom, you're shaking. What's wrong?" Jennifer hugged her back, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had to protect them, keep them safe. She couldn't let them know the full extent of the danger they were in. Not yet, at least. "There's just something wrong, sweetie. Something we don't understand, but I'm going to figure it out. We just need to stay inside, okay?" Max, who had grown more withdrawn in the past few days, stepped forward. "Is it about the neighbor, Mom? We've been hearing noises in the walls. I don't like it." Jennifer's stomach turned. How much had they been exposed to? How much had they heard that she hadn't? "I don't know what's going on," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we can't go near their house anymore. You hear me? Promise me." The kids nodded solemnly, their expression is mirroring the same unease Jennifer had felt ever since moving into the house. As the night wore on, Jennifer kept vigil by the windows, her eyes darting toward Thomas and his wife's house. She hadn't seen them leave, and the upstairs light was still on, flickering like it always did. Her mind raced, thinking about the words the woman had said. "The house has marked you." It was as if she was talking about something ancient, something not bound by time or logic. The power of that house seemed to seep through the very walls of Jennifer's home, like an invisible thread connecting them all. She had to find out more. She had to figure out how to break whatever hold the house had over them. At 2 a.m., Jennifer finally decided that she couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers. And there was one place left to go: the town library. She had heard rumors about Hollow Creek, about the strange things that had happened there over the years. If she could get her hands on any records, any history about the land they lived on, she might be able to understand what she was dealing with. She made her way to the library the next morning, her steps heavy as she walked across the empty streets. The sun was barely up, but the air was thick with fog, a pale mist that clung to everything it touched. The library stood at the end of the street, a large, looming building with ivy crawling up its stone walls. It looked ancient, just like everything else in Hollow Creek. Inside, the air was musty and old, the shelves filled with books that hadn't been touched in years. Jennifer walked to the front desk, where an elderly librarian sat, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. The librarian looked up from her book, her pale eyes scanning Jennifer's face with an almost knowing gaze. "Can I help you?" the librarian asked, her voice raspy. Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. "I need to find out more about the history of this town. Specifically, anything about the land that the houses on Maple Street were built on. Do you have records from long ago?" The librarian studied Jennifer for a long moment before she nodded slowly. "We have records from the founding of the town, but I must warn you, some things are better left forgotten." Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The librarian smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was thin, as though she knew something Jennifer didn't. "Some things are buried here, hidden from those who don't belong. But you're here now. The truth is waiting for you." Jennifer felt a chill crawl up her spine, but she pushed it aside. She had come this far. She needed to know. The librarian led her to a back room, filled with dusty old tomes and bound records. She pulled a heavy leather-bound book from the shelf and opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. As the librarian flipped through the pages, Jennifer scanned the room nervously, her eyes darting to the windows. The silence in the room was suffocating, the air thick with secrets. "There it is," the librarian murmured, her finger tracing a line in the book. "Maple Street. The land was once part of a larger estate. The original owner, a man named Silas Holloway, built his mansion here in the early end of 1800s. But there were rumors. Strange things started to happen around the time he died. People began disappearing. Some say the house became cursed after he died. Others believe the land was cursed long before he arrived." Jennifer leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean, cursed?" The librarian looked at her with an unreadable expression. "There are stories, legends really, of rituals, of things done to summon power from the earth. Silas Holloway was rumored to have dabbled in dark arts, attempting to control forces beyond his understanding. The land he built his house on had an ancient energy, one that he tried to harness, and it seems that energy still lingers." Jennifer felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had thought the house was the source of the evil, but it seemed the land itself was cursed, bound by something far older and far darker than she had imagined. "Can you tell me more?" Jennifer asked, desperate for answers. The librarian closed the book with a soft thud. "Some things can never be fully understood. The house on Maple Street is not just any house. It's a portal, an opening between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Those who live there are tied to the land. If you're not careful, you'll become part of it. The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She had to get her family out. They couldn't stay in this cursed house any longer. But how could they leave when it seemed like the land itself had already marked them? And what about Thomas and his wife? Had they been consumed by this evil as well? As the librarian handed her the book, she gave Jennifer a final warning. Leave now, while you still can. Some things are better left undisturbed. Jennifer didn't need to be told twice. She left the library with the weight of the book in her hands and fear gnawing at her insides. The answers were only deepening the mystery, but one thing was clear. Whatever had taken hold of Maple Street was not finished with them yet. As Jennifer made her way back home, the weight of the librarian's words pressed heavily on her chest. The air seemed heavier now, as if the fog had seeped into her very soul. She clutched the leather-bound book tightly, as though it held the key to unlocking the terrifying truths about the land. Her mind raced as she approached her house. The oppressive silence of the street had returned, and though she had heard nothing from the house. As she walked through the front door, Max and Lily looked up at her with expectant eyes. She had promised them she would figure it out, that everything would be okay. Mom, what did you... Jennifer took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. I found some things, she said, her voice faltering. She motioned for the kids to sit down. Max and Lily exchanged dwell. She sat down with them on the couch, placing the book on the coffee table. This town, it's not just like any other place. There's something wrong here. The land, the house, everything's connected, and it's been that way for centuries. The house across the street, the one Thomas and his wife live in, it's part of something much darker than I realized. Lily's small voice broke the silence. Mom, are we safe here? Is the house bad? Jennifer swallowed hard, the fear in her chest threatening to choke her. I'm not sure, but we're going to stay strong. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we're safe. Max's eyes widened. What do you mean? What's going to happen? Jennifer picked up the book, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. The history of the land was like a dark riddle, its meaning elusive, each turn of the page revealing deeper layers of terror. The house on Maple Street, it's not just a house. It's a portal. Something was done there a long time ago to bind the living to the dead, and that power, that evil energy, still lingers. Max frowned. A portal to where? To the dead? Jennifer nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, the energy from the land, from the house, it's tied to both worlds. It allows things to come through, to watch, to feed off the living. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Are we going to be okay? Jennifer gathered both of her children into her arms. I'm going to make sure we're okay, I promise. But we have to be careful. We have to stay away from Thomas and his wife. And we can't go near that house anymore. Not ever. But just as Jennifer thought she might have reassured them, the house creaked. It was the kind of sound a house makes when it settles into its foundation. But this was different. It was louder, more deliberate, as if something or someone was moving within the walls. Jennifer's heart raced. Stay here, she said quickly, her voice tight. I'll check it out. She walked cautiously toward the source of the noise, her breath shallow in her chest. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for a late afternoon. She reached the basement door, which had been shut since they moved in. It was cracked open just slightly, enough for her to see a faint light flickering within. Without thinking, she grabbed the handle and opened the door. The basement stairs were steep, winding downward into the dark. She could hear the low hum of something, like an electrical current running through the air, only much colder. Her feet hesitated on the first step, but she forced herself to move, the pull of the unknown drawing her forward. The basement was exactly as she had left it, bare, empty, and shadowed. But something was different now. The faint, pulsing light came from a small corner of the basement, where a strange old mirror was propped up against the wall. Jennifer hadn't noticed it when they first moved in. It had been hidden in the shadows, tucked away in the corner like some forgotten relic. But now, it stood there, its surface shimmering with an unnatural glow. She took a step closer, her hand trembling as she reached for the mirror. As her fingers brushed against the cold glass, a jolt of energy surged through her, making her jerk back in shock. The reflection in the mirror was distorted, warped, as if something was trying to reach through. Then she saw it. For a brief moment, the reflection in the mirror shifted. She was still standing there, her hand hovering just above the surface. But in the mirror, there was something else. Someone else. The same man, the neighbor Thomas, was standing behind her, his eyes cold and wide, watching her through the mirror. Jennifer gasped and stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The image in the mirror flickered again, but this time, it didn't show Thomas. It showed something else, something worse. A dark, shadowy figure, distorted and inhuman, stood at the edge of the mirror. It had no face, only a pair of black, empty sockets where eyes should have been. Its long, skeletal arms stretched out toward Jennifer, and though it was only a reflection, she could feel its presence, cold and suffocating. The figure moved closer, its fingers reaching for her, and Jennifer felt the air around her grow heavy. She couldn't breathe. The room was closing in on her. Suddenly there was a loud bang. Jennifer spun around, her heart pounding. It was coming from upstairs. The kids, they were upstairs. Bah! Max, Lily! She screamed, rushing up the stairs 2 at a time. But when she reached the top, the house was eerily silent. Too silent. She ran into the living room, but it was empty. Her heart pounded as she checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the closets. There was no sign of them. They had vanished. Jennifer's stomach twisted with dread. She didn't know where they had gone, but she knew, she felt it deep inside, that something was happening to them. Something dark. Something that had already claimed the house. She turned back toward the basement, her mind racing. Whatever power was haunting this house, whatever evil was tied to it, had taken her family. And the mirror was the key. But what was Thomas's role in all of this? Was he a part of the curse, or was he another victim of the land's dark magic? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. She would get her family back. She had to. Jennifer stood at the edge of the basement, the air thick with dread. The house was no longer a place of refuge. It had become a prison, and the walls seemed to close in around her with every passing second. Her thoughts raced as she grappled with the horrifying reality that her children were missing, and the darkness from the mirror was inching closer to consuming everything. She had seen it, felt it in her bones. The figure, the shadow, reaching out from the mirror like an ancient force, something born from the earth, the land itself. The mirror wasn't just a reflection, it was a gateway, a conduit for the evil that had long been buried beneath the house. As Jennifer stood frozen, her hands gripping the banister, a faint noise reached her ears, a soft whisper carried on the wind, a voice so low that it was almost imperceptible. It sounded like her name, drawn out and distorted. She turned sharply, her heart pounding, eyes darting around the empty house. "Jennifer, help us!" It was Max's voice. It came from somewhere deeper inside the house. It didn't sound like it was coming from a room. It was everywhere. She felt it, the presence, the pull of something powerful and ancient calling her to the depths of the house. She couldn't waste any more time. She had to find them, before the house, or whatever evil was inside it, took them for good. Following the sound of Max's voice, Jennifer descended further into the dark corners of the house. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the chill in the air thickening the closer she got to the basement. The house creaked with every step she took, as though the walls were alive, watching her, waiting for her to step into its trap. As Jennifer reached the basement door, the eerie silence settled around her once more. She hesitated, the weight of what she had learned at the library pressing heavily on her chest. She thought about what the librarian had said. The house had been built on cursed land. Rituals had been performed here, dark magic tied to the land, binding the living to the dead. And now, her family was caught in the crossfire. She knew now that it wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was the land itself, steeped in dark rituals and lost histories. The mirror was a part of it, an ancient artifact, a link to whatever malevolent force resided in Hollow Creek. Jennifer opened the basement door with a sharp creak. The faint glow from the mirror cast long shadows along the walls, twisting and writhing like something alive. But now, there was something different. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was pulsing, a dark light swirling within it like a storm ready to break. Through the mirror, she saw them, Max and Lily. They were standing in the room on the other side, their faces pale and wide-eyed. But they weren't alone. The shadow, the figure that had been reaching for her before, was there too. Its form twisted and blurred, growing in size until it was almost towering over her children. The coldness from the mirror seemed to leak into the room, and Jennifer could feel the grip of fear tightening around her chest. The entity wasn't just a shadow. It was something much worse. It was the power of the land itself, an ancient force awakened. "Mom!" Max shouted through the glass, his voice distant but desperate. "Help us. Please help us." Jennifer's heart broke as she reached toward the mirror. She couldn't just stand there. She had to act, had to break the hold this thing had over her family. She stepped forward, reaching for the mirror's surface. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a shock of coldness ripped through her body. She gasped, the world around her spinning as she felt herself being pulled into the reflection. In a split second, Jennifer was no longer in her basement. She was in the same room her children were, the room filled with that cold, suffocating air. The mirror had swallowed her whole. She stumbled forward, her feet unsteady as she moved toward Max and Lily. They were still there, their eyes wide with fear. The shadow loomed over them, its form flickering in and out of existence like a broken image on a screen. Its hollow, empty eyes locked onto Jennifer, and she felt the weight of its gaze pressing into her very soul. "Mom, get us out of here," Max cried, his voice tinged with panic. Jennifer took a deep breath, forcing her body to remain calm. The power that had taken hold of this place, of her family, wasn't something that could be fought with brute strength. It was something darker, something rooted in the land itself. She turned to face the shadow. "What are you?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear but tinged with defiance. "Why are you doing this?" The shadow's form shifted, and the air around them grew colder still. It didn't answer with words. Instead, it raised one skeletal hand toward her, as if to strike. But Jennifer didn't back down. She had come this far. She wasn't going to lose her family now. A brilliant light erupted from the candle, flooding the room with warmth and energy. The shadow screamed in agony, its form disintegrating into the light as the house itself began to shake. Jennifer pulled Max and Lily toward her, shielding them with her own body as the light grew brighter. The ground beneath them cracked, and the house seemed to crumble. But just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The light faded, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Jennifer opened her eyes, unsure of what had happened. When she looked around, the mirror was gone. The shadow, the evil that had plagued them, was gone too. And in its place was nothing but the familiar, peaceful air of the basement. Max and Lily stood beside her, their faces no longer filled with fear but with relief. The oppressive weight had lifted, and they were free. "We did it," Jennifer whispered, pulling them close. Max looked up at her, his eyes wide with awe. "But how? What happened?" Jennifer smiled softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We broke the curse. We're free now. The house, the land, it can't hurt us anymore." But as she turned to walk back toward the stairs, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The whisper she had heard earlier, the one that had drawn her into the basement, echoed in her mind one last time. "This is not the end of the end. Thank you for staying with the story." This concludes the main arc of The Haunted Neighbor. Jennifer and her family have broken free from the curse that haunted their home, but the mystery of the land and its dark power lingers. If you have any further ideas or would like to explore more stories, feel free to ask. The night had fallen over the sleepy town of Haverhill, wrapping the streets in a blanket of stillness. The only sound that disturbed the silence was the distant hum of the wind rustling through the trees. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where doors were left unlocked at night, and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. But that night, something was about to shatter the peaceful facade of this quiet place. It began in the early hours of the morning. Just past 2 a.m., a man named Thomas Hendricks was found lying in the street, lifeless and cold. The police were called, and the investigation began. There were no signs of struggle, no obvious injuries, only the faintest trace of blood smeared across the asphalt. It seemed like a quiet, natural death at first, perhaps a heart attack or an accidental fall. But as the night wore on, the truth became much more chilling. The only witness to the crime was a dog. Her name was Bella, a large German shepherd who lived with her elderly owner, Mrs. Richards, just a few houses down from where Thomas had been found. Bella had always been a quiet dog, loyal to her owner and protective of their home. But that night, she had seen something no one else had. A figure moving in the shadows, creeping around the edge of the street. She had heard the faint sounds of footsteps, low voices whispering in the wind. But Bella had not been able to do anything about it. As the sun began to rise, the police sifted through evidence, interviewing witnesses who had heard nothing, seen nothing. The small town of Haverhill seemed untouched by the horrors of the outside world. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear that the true story was hidden in the silence of the night, witnessed only by Bella. Detective Rachel Clark had been called in to investigate. A seasoned investigator with years of experience, Rachel was no stranger to complicated cases. But something about this one unsettled her. The fact that no one had heard or seen anything didn't sit right. There was something wrong about Thomas's death, something lurking beneath the surface that no one had yet uncovered. The first thing Rachel did was visit Mrs. Richards, hoping to get some insight into Bella's strange behavior the night before. Mrs. Richards, frail but sharp-minded, was sitting in her living room, looking out of the window at the empty street. Her old eyes seemed clouded with worry. "Detective, I know what you're going to ask," Mrs. Richards said, before Rachel even opened her mouth. "Bella's been acting strange for days. She's been restless, pacing at night, barking at the window. I thought she was just getting old, but now I'm not so sure." Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? Has she been behaving differently?" Mrs. Richards nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her cane. "Last night she wouldn't stop barking. I thought maybe there was something outside. So I went to check. I didn't see anything, but Bella was going mad. She was barking and growling, almost like she was trying to warn someone. But there was nothing there, Detective. Nothing at all." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Did she seem agitated, like she was trying to protect something?" Mrs. Richards sighed deeply, her gaze shifting toward the empty street once again. "Yes, she's been like that for days now. I thought maybe it was just old age catching up to her, but now," her voice trailed off as she looked out the window, her eyes distant. Rachel stood up and turned toward Bella, who was lying quietly in the corner of the room. The dog's eyes flicked up to meet hers, but there was something unnerving about the way she looked at her. Something knowing, almost as if Bella had seen more than any human could. "Can you tell me what happened, Bella?" Rachel whispered, kneeling down in front of the dog. Bella didn't move, didn't bark or wag her tail. She just stared back, her dark eyes filled with a strange, unspoken understanding. Rachel had seen this kind of thing before. Animals, especially dogs, who had witnessed traumatic events, often acted differently afterward. Bella wasn't just a dog. She was a witness, a silent one, whose testimony could unlock the mystery behind Thomas's death. But the question remained, what had she seen? Rachel decided to take Bella for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping the dog would lead her to something useful. As they passed by the spot where Thomas had been found, Bella stopped, her body tensing, her nose twitching. She sniffed the air, then turned her head toward a nearby alleyway. Rachel followed Bella's gaze and noticed something odd. The alleyway was dark and narrow, barely lit by the weak morning sunlight. It was a quiet spot, one that most people would ignore, but Bella seemed to be fixated on it. "Do you know something, girl?" Rachel murmured, kneeling down next to the dog. Bella growled low in her throat, her body rigid. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She was onto something. Bella wasn't just acting out of confusion, she was reacting to something in that alleyway. Rachel walked slowly toward the alley, Bella at her side. As they reached the entrance, she noticed something unusual. Scratches on the brick wall, as though someone had tried to hide something there. It looked fresh, like it had been made recently. The area seemed untouched by time, but now, the traces of something dark and disturbing were becoming visible. "I'm going to need to check this," Rachel said softly, her mind already working through the possibilities. She needed to look deeper into the history of Thomas's life, his relationships, and whether anyone had ever been close to him enough to want him dead. But just as she was about to turn away, Bella growled sharply, her hackles raised. Rachel whipped around, her eyes scanning the street. She saw nothing. But she felt it, the unmistakable presence of someone watching. Bella barked suddenly, the sound sharp and urgent. Rachel followed the dog's gaze, and that's when she saw it. A man, standing at the far end of the street, watching them. He was tall, his features obscured by the shadows. His eyes, though, were unmistakably cold, like they had seen things they shouldn't have. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance. "Who was that?" Rachel muttered, under her breath. Bella's growls had softened, but her body remained tense, still on edge. The dog knew something Rachel didn't yet understand. The man had been close to Thomas. That much was clear. Rachel turned back to Bella, her thoughts swirling. "You've seen something, haven't you, Bella?" The dog's eyes met hers again. For the first time, Rachel felt a sense of urgency. The silence between them was the loudest thing in the world. Bella had seen it all. Now it was up to Rachel to piece it together. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Bella knew something she didn't. As she led the dog back to Mrs. Richards' home, her mind raced through the possibilities. The strange man she had seen in the distance, Bella's unsettling behavior, and the scratches on the alleyway wall. They were all connected. But how? Back at the house, Rachel sat with Mrs. Richards, trying to piece together any fragment of information that might help. Bella lay quietly on the floor, watching them with those knowing eyes. "Mrs. Richards, I need to ask you about Thomas. Did you know him well? Was there anyone who might have had a problem with him?" Rachel asked, her voice soft but insistent. Mrs. Richards sat in her favorite armchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Oh, Thomas. He wasn't a bad man. He kept to himself mostly. But I did hear rumors. There were whispers about him, especially after his wife passed away a few years ago. Some said he'd been mixed up in some shady dealings, but I never thought much of it. You know how people talk." Rachel nodded, her instincts telling her that the rumors were more than just gossip. "What kind of dealings?" Mrs. Richards hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though she were trying to recall something long forgotten. "I don't know, really. People said he had connections. People came to visit him late at night. Strange types. But I only ever saw shadows through his curtains. I'm not one to gossip, detective. I've got enough on my plate without getting mixed up in other people's business." Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Do you remember anything specific? Even the smallest detail could help. For a long moment, Mrs. Richards stared out the window, lost in thought. Then, as though something clicked in her mind, she spoke again. "There was one thing," she said, her voice low. "I remember a few months ago, Thomas was having an argument with someone. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was heated. And then, not long after that, the man who'd been coming around, he disappeared. He didn't show up at Thomas's house anymore. That's when the rumors started. People said Thomas had gotten involved with something dangerous, maybe even criminal." Rachel's gut twisted. The man who had disappeared. That could be the person Bella had sensed. The one she had been trying to warn them about. "Did you ever see this man?" Rachel asked, jotting down notes. "No," Mrs. Richards replied, shaking her head. "Never in person. But I saw him once, standing across the street. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, always seemed to be lurking around, watching Thomas' house. After he stopped coming around, I didn't see anyone else like him." The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but Rachel knew she was missing something crucial. There was still so much they didn't know about Thomas's life before his death. "Thank you, Mrs. Richards. This helps more than you know," Rachel said, rising from her seat. She turned toward Bella, who was now sitting up, ears perked, watching Rachel closely. "We're going to get to the bottom of this." Rachel made her way back to the police station, the weight of the case heavy on her shoulders. She reviewed the notes from the coroner's report, looking for any sign of foul play. The cause of death was still undetermined. There were no signs of violence, no marks, no injuries to suggest anything other than a sudden collapse or a heart attack. But something about it all didn't add up. The mysterious man, Bella's behavior, the tension in the neighborhood. It was all leading to something bigger, something darker. Rachel decided to follow up on the man Mrs. Richards had described, hoping to find more information. She pulled up Thomas's record and sifted through his background. Thomas Hendricks had lived in Haverhill for over 20 years. His wife, Sarah, had passed away unexpectedly from an illness 3 years ago. And since then, Thomas had become more of a recluse. He'd worked in construction, but nothing about his life seemed to suggest any criminal activity. The only oddity was his sudden change in behavior after his wife's death. Rachel's eyes skimmed over the record, and that's when she saw it. A single name, Andrew Hale. Thomas had made several financial transactions to a man by the name of Andrew Hale in the months leading up to his death. The amount of money wasn't huge, but it was consistent. Small payments for services rendered, it seemed. "Who the hell is Andrew Hale?" Rachel muttered under her breath. She pulled up Andrew Hale's record, only to find that it was sparse. No significant criminal history, no arrests, but his name had been flagged a few times for being linked to various shady businesses in the town's darker corners. Andrew Hale had no known address, and there were no recent sightings of him. Rachel's mind raced. This man was somehow tied to Thomas's death. She was sure of it. The financial transactions, the suspicious behavior, the man lurking around Thomas's house. It was all connected. The phone rang on her desk, interrupting her thoughts. "Detective Clark?" the voice on the other end said. It was Officer Harris. "We've got something on the man, Hale. We found an old address for him. He used to live in a small apartment building on the edge of town. We've got a search warrant. Do you want us to check it out?" Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Yes, definitely. Get there as soon as possible and keep me updated." She grabbed her coat and headed out the door, knowing that this was the break she had been waiting for. If Andrew Hale had anything to do with Thomas's death, she was about to find out. Rachel's pulse quickened as she drove toward the outskirts of Haverhill. The weight of the case was on her shoulders, and as much as she tried to keep her focus, her mind kept returning to the silent witness, the dog, Bella. The more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that Bella knew something they all didn't. Dogs were known to be sensitive to their surroundings, but Bella's behavior had been unlike anything Rachel had ever seen. The way the dog had reacted, the growls and the anxious pacing, had been a clear sign that something, or someone, was near. Now, with the search warrant in hand, Rachel was about to confront whatever it was that had been haunting Thomas Hendricks, his mysterious connections, and the strange man who had been linked to him, Andrew Hale. As Rachel pulled up to the apartment building on the edge of town, she noticed immediately how quiet it was. The apartment complex was small and run down, with cracked windows and peeling paint. It was the kind of place where the residents likely kept to themselves, trying to stay out of the way. This part of town was often ignored by the police unless something serious went down. Rachel's instincts told her this was the kind of place where trouble festered. She parked her car near the entrance and stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel. Harris, a tall officer with dark hair and a sharp focus, was already waiting by the building's entrance. As they left the apartment, Rachel felt the pressure building. Everything was pointing to the creek, to some deal made in the shadows, and the truth was slipping just out of reach. She was getting closer, but she wasn't sure how much longer she had before the case consumed her, too. Back at the police station, Rachel gathered her team to strategize. They needed to figure out who had been involved with Thomas and Hale. But before they could make any real progress, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The phone rang. It was an officer at the creek. "We found something," the officer said. "It's not good. You need to come down here." Rachel's heart raced as she grabbed her jacket and turned to Harris. "Let's go." Rachel's footsteps echoed through the cold, empty streets as she made her way to the creek. Harris was close behind, his silence a testament to the grim nature of the case. The chill of the evening air cut through their jackets as they neared the familiar, yet now ominous, waterway that had become the center of the investigation. The creek stretched in front of them, its murky waters reflecting the dim light from the street lamps above. The trees on either side were swaying in the wind, casting long shadows over the ground. It was a place where many of the town's residents used to stroll, the creek once a tranquil escape. But tonight, the area felt suffocating, drenched in a palpable tension that weighed heavily in the air. The officer who had called them stood by the bank of the creek, his face grim. "Detective, we found something in the water." Rachel nodded and walked toward him, her mind racing with possibilities. Could it be another body? Or was it something more? An object, a clue, anything that would shed light on what had really happened to Thomas. She knelt down beside the officer, her eyes scanning the water. A rope lay half submerged in the murky creek, coiled like a serpent, its ends tangled among the rocks and reeds. The rope was frayed, and it appeared to have been used recently. It wasn't the only thing in the water. Beneath the surface, barely visible in the dim light, were two objects: an old, rusted metal box and a broken wooden crate. Rachel turned to Harris. "Get a team down here. We need to pull everything from the water. While they waited for the forensics team to arrive, Rachel walked along the bank, her mind swirling with questions. Why was the rope here? Why was it in the creek? The box and the crate, what had they been used for? She knew they were going to uncover something disturbing. The team arrived shortly, equipped with tools to carefully extract the items from the creek. The rusted box was brought to the surface first. It looked ancient, its edges worn and chipped. When it was opened, Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Inside, there were stacks of papers, contracts, bills of sale, and other documents that seemed completely unrelated to the death of Thomas. But there was one thing that stood out among the papers: a handwritten ledger, detailing large sums of money, dates, and names that Rachel recognized. One of the names was Andrew Hale. Rachel's stomach twisted. The box, buried in the creek for who knows how long, contained the very evidence she had been searching for. Hale's name was everywhere, intertwined with financial transactions. And these weren't simple transactions. The amounts were large, too large to be coincidence. The ledger detailed payments made in exchange for goods that weren't listed, vague terms that hinted at something far more illicit than a simple business deal. The crates came next. When it was pulled out of the water, it was splintered and broken, but Rachel could make out faded markings on the side, an address, and what looked like a company name. She read it aloud: Hale Enterprises. The realization struck her like a slap in the face. Andrew Hale had been involved in something much bigger than anyone had realized. It wasn't just a business arrangement with Thomas. It was something criminal, something that reached deeper into the heart of the town. Rachel turned to the officer. I want all this sent to forensics immediately. We need to know what was in those crates and who else might be involved in Hale's dealings. And I want to track down Hale, now. Harris nodded, already pulling out his phone to make the necessary calls. As he did, Rachel stood, her thoughts consumed by the implications of what they had just uncovered. This was no random death. Thomas had been involved in something illegal, something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. We need to get to the bottom of this, Rachel muttered to herself, her eyes still on the creek. The only way to stop this is to find out everything Hale is hiding. The investigation picked up pace after the discovery at the creek. Rachel worked tirelessly, combing through the newly uncovered evidence with Harris and the rest of the team. They uncovered more and more of Hale's dealings: money laundering, illegal trade, and even evidence of weapons trafficking. The web of crime Hale had woven was vast, stretching beyond the quiet town of Haverhill and reaching into more dangerous territories. Rachel's team had managed to trace Hale's movements, piecing together his time in Haverhill. They found that Hale had been frequenting a small warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place that no one had ever noticed before. It was isolated, surrounded by a tall fence and heavily guarded, with few windows and no visible signs of activity. Rachel knew that whatever was hidden inside the warehouse was key to unlocking the mystery of Thomas's death. One cold morning, as the investigation reached its critical point, Rachel and her team prepared to raid the warehouse. They had obtained a warrant and the clock was ticking. The closer they got to Hale, the closer they came to understanding the real reason behind Thomas's death. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place too perfectly. But something still gnawed at her. Bella, the dog, and the fact that the silent witness seemed to know more than they could ever comprehend. As Rachel arrived at the warehouse, her heart pounded. The place was ominous, and the quietness around it was unnerving. She didn't know what they would find once they breached the doors, but she had a feeling it was going to be worse than they imagined. "Ready?" Harris asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Rachel nodded. "Let's do this." The team moved quickly, storming the entrance and breaking through the locked doors. The warehouse was dimly lit, and the smell of dust and dampness filled the air. But what they found inside was far more disturbing than Rachel could have anticipated. Crates upon crates were stacked high in one corner, some marked with strange symbols. As the team began to open them, they discovered a shocking collection of weapons, firearms, explosives, and other items meant for something far more sinister than mere business dealings. But there was more. Buried under the weapons was a set of photographs, faded and torn, showing images of Thomas Hendricks, Andrew Hale, and a group of other men, all standing together in front of a large, imposing structure that looked like a mansion. Rachel's heart stopped as she realized the connection. The mansion. It was the house on Hollow Creek, the house where Thomas had been involved in the dark dealings, and where the final betrayal had taken place. It was more than just a place. It was the heart of Hale's operation. And now it was their next destination. With the evidence from the warehouse, Rachel made the decision to raid the house. The team quickly assembled, preparing for the final confrontation. They had all the pieces they needed to confront Hale and bring the truth to light. But Rachel knew that the mansion held its own secrets, secrets that might just cost them everything. The drive to Hollow Creek was the longest Rachel had ever experienced. The mansion loomed in her mind, its dark history now intertwined with every piece of evidence they had gathered. This wasn't just a raid. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. It was now or never. The mansion stood at the edge of the town, isolated and imposing. Overgrown vines crept up its stone walls, and the windows, though large and elegant, were eerily dark. It seemed like a house out of time, frozen in a period long past, but with a sinister presence that made it feel very much alive. As Rachel pulled up with Harris and the rest of her team, she felt the familiar knot of dread tighten in her chest. This was where it had all started. This was where it would end. Rachel stepped out of the car, her breath visible in the cold air. The mansion's dark silhouette against the sky made her skin prickle. As her team assembled, she gave them a last firm set of instructions. "We know Hale is inside. He's been hiding out here for weeks, using the mansion as his headquarters. He's got a network of people, and this place could be armed to the teeth. Be careful and take no chances." The team nodded in unison, preparing for the worst. "We'll take the front entrance," Rachel continued. "Harris, you and I will go through the back. Let's move quickly and stay sharp." The plan was simple, but Rachel knew there was nothing simple about what lay ahead. Andrew Hale wasn't just a criminal. He was dangerous, and whatever had been going on in this mansion, whatever deal had been struck between him and Thomas Hendricks, was much darker than she had initially realized. They made their way to the entrance, the heavy wooden doors standing between them and the truth. Rachel could feel the eyes of the mansion on her, its walls, its dark history. Everything about it screamed danger. As she placed her hand on the door, she hesitated for just a second, but only for a moment. She pushed forward, and the door creaked open. Inside, the mansion was even darker than she had imagined. A long, winding staircase led up to a second floor, while the grand hallway stretched ahead, illuminated by low, flickering lights. The air inside was cold and musty, but there was something else, something oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Rachel motioned for Harris to follow her as they moved forward. The house was vast, with rooms that seemed to go on forever. Each door they passed looked like it led to something darker, but Rachel kept her focus. They had to find Hale. The first room they checked was a small study, filled with bookshelves and old furniture. But it didn't look like anyone had used it in a long time. The fireplace was cold, the books covered in dust. There was nothing here. Rachel's heart sank. She had expected this place to be a hub of activity, a place where Hale was hiding. But this room was empty, a relic of a time long past. "Keep moving," she muttered to Harris, her eyes scanning the room one last time. "He's here somewhere." As they moved through the mansion, the silence grew deeper. The walls felt like they were closing in on them, and every step they took echoed in the stillness. They reached a large set of double doors at the end of the hallway. This was it. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as she pushed open the doors. The room they entered was massive, like a ballroom, but with a cold, empty grandeur. Tall windows lined the walls, but the glass was dirty and obscured by years of neglect. The chandelier above, though magnificent, hung low and covered in cobwebs. It was a place built for opulence, but now it was a shell, decaying and forgotten. And in the center of the room, standing by a long, polished table, was Andrew Hale. He turned slowly as the doors creaked open, his eyes locking on to Rachel's. His expression was unreadable, but there was no surprise in his eyes, no fear. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, ready for the inevitable confrontation. "Well, well," Hale said, his voice smooth and calm. "I was wondering when you'd show up. I suppose you've been busy connecting the dots, haven't you?" Rachel's grip tightened on her gun, her fingers cold against the metal. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Hendricks and for your involvement in illegal trafficking and money laundering." Hale raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Murder? I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas made his own choices. He got too greedy and I warned him about it. But you don't get it, do you? This wasn't about him. This is bigger than just one man. It's bigger than you." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Hale's lips curled into a dark smile. "You don't know, do you? All this time, you've been looking for answers, but you're only scratching the surface. This town, this land, it's cursed, detective. We've been making deals here for generations. Thomas wasn't the first, and he won't be the last." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Hale's eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and something darker. "The land itself is a conduit, detective. The power beneath it. Some people know how to tap into it. I've spent my whole life working with it, using it to get what I want. Thomas, he was just a pawn, a weak man. But me? I'm not so easily controlled. I understand what's going on here. I've seen the darkness in this place, and I've learned how to use it." Rachel stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can control the land? The people who have died here? You're insane." Hale's smile never wavered. Insane? Maybe. But I'm still alive, aren't I? And the truth is, Rachel, you're too late. You've come this far, but the power has already taken root in me. There's no turning back. Not now. Before Rachel could react, Hale made a quick movement. He slammed his hand down on a hidden switch near the table, and suddenly, the room seemed to tremble. The air grew thick with a strange energy, and the lights flickered as if they were on the verge of going out completely. Harris moved forward, but Rachel grabbed his arm. "Stay back," she hissed. The ground beneath them rumbled, as if the house itself were waking up, its foundations shifting, responding to Hale's actions. And then, it happened. From the floor, dark tendrils of shadow began to rise, coiling like smoke, reaching out toward Rachel and Harris. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and the temperature dropped drastically. It was the same energy Rachel had felt in the mansion before. The same power that had clung to this place from the very beginning. "This is what I've been working toward," Hale said, his voice almost reverent. "Now I have control, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The shadows swirled around them, twisting and writhing like serpents. But Rachel didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "You're wrong, Hale. This isn't your power. This land belongs to no one." In that moment, as the darkness closed in, Rachel realized what she had to do. The land, the house, the evil that had permeated this place. It wasn't just a physical entity. It was an ancient force, one that had been bound to this place for centuries. And the only way to defeat it was to sever the connection between Hale and the land once and for all. With a final defiant cry, Rachel reached for the nearest object, a large, ornate mirror that hung on the wall. She smashed it to the ground, the glass shattering with a deafening crash. As the mirror shattered, the darkness around them recoiled, retreating like a wave, pulling back into the ocean. Hale screamed as the power he had tapped into began to slip from his grasp. The shadows faded, and the mansion fell silent. Rachel stood panting as the dust settled. Hale was on the floor, disoriented, his connection to the land broken. The power had dissipated. "We're done here," Rachel said quietly, her voice calm despite the chaos that had unfolded. As she looked around the mansion, now silent and still, she knew that the curse had been lifted. But the battle wasn't over. There were more secrets to uncover and more work to be done. As the dust settled in the mansion and the shadows retreated into the corners of the room, the oppressive air lifted, leaving Rachel standing in the midst of the wreckage. She looked at Andrew Hale, who was slumped on the floor, his face contorted with confusion and disbelief. The connection between him and the dark forces that had long plagued the mansion and Haverhill had been severed, but at a cost. Rachel took a step forward, her hand still gripping the pistol, but there was no need for it anymore. Hale wasn't going to fight back. He was broken, his power vanishing like smoke in the wind. The air was heavy with silence, and the house, which had once been alive with the dark energy of the land, now felt hollow, almost empty. "Andrew Hale," Rachel said, her voice cold and firm. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Hendricks, illegal trafficking, and your role in the criminal network you've built in this town." Hale, still reeling from the loss of his power, looked up at Rachel with a mixture of anger and resignation. "You don't understand," he muttered weakly. "The power of this land, it was never mine to control. I just learned how to use it." Rachel shook her head. That power was never meant for anyone. And now, it's gone. Hale didn't respond. He simply slumped against the wall, his gaze distant, as if something inside him had broken permanently. Rachel didn't feel satisfaction or triumph. The price for bringing him down had been steep. She had seen firsthand the forces Hale had been toying with. Forces that weren't just about money or power, but about something darker, something that transcended time and reason. As Harris and the rest of the team entered the room, Rachel stepped back, allowing them to take Hale into custody. The shadows in the mansion had receded, and the oppressive atmosphere that had filled the air was now gone. But Rachel knew that the real work was far from over. The mansion was a relic of a past that no one wanted to acknowledge. The land on which it stood had been cursed for generations, and while they had ended Hale's reign over it, the legacy of its dark history would take time to unravel. The town of Haverhill, now freed from the grip of Hale and his criminal empire, had a long road ahead of it. Rachel left the mansion with Harris, her mind still racing. They had solved the murder, but there were so many unanswered questions. What had happened to the others before Thomas? How many people had been hurt by Hale's actions? And most pressing of all, how much of the land's curse was still left? Outside, the night had settled into a peaceful quiet. The once ominous mansion behind them now seemed like an abandoned relic, just another forgotten piece of the past. Rachel stared at it for a moment longer before turning away. She had done what needed to be done, but she could feel that something still lingered in the air, a residual chill that wasn't quite gone. "Do you think it's really over?" Harris asked, his voice low as he walked beside her. Rachel sighed, her thoughts heavy. "I don't know. We've stopped Hale, but there's still a lot we don't understand. There are secrets buried here, in the land, in this town. We've broken one chain, but how many more are there?" Harris looked up at the mansion, his expression grim. "You think it's still cursed?" Rachel hesitated. "The land was never just about the people who lived here. It's the land itself. Whatever happened here, it has a long history. Maybe it's not over, but we've stopped the immediate danger." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of everything they had learned settling between them. Rachel had solved the case, but there was a lingering feeling that the story was far from finished. As they got into the car, Rachel glanced out of the window one last time at the mansion, its silhouette casting a long shadow under the fading moonlight. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in one of the windows, watching her leave. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. She didn't know if it was the land, the lingering presence of the curse, or just her mind playing tricks. But one thing was certain: Haverhill had changed. And whether or not it had truly been freed, only time would tell. But for now, Rachel had done her job. The silent witness, Bella the dog, had led her to the truth, and the criminal network that had poisoned the town was dismantled. The darkness had been driven back, and for once, the silence felt like a promise of peace. The end, thank you for reading through the entire journey of the silent witness. Rachel Clark, the the determined detective, has uncovered the truth about Thomas Hendrick's death and Andrew Hale's criminal empire, but the lingering sense of mystery and the land's curse leaves room for more questions. If you'd like to explore more stories, or if you'd like to start a new adventure, feel free to let me know.